The Galactic Council had never faced a problem like humanity. For thousands of cycles, the Council, a coalition of 12 advanced species, maintained order across 3 spiral arms. They had rules for war, for trade, for first contact. But they had no rule for a species that refused to stay in its assigned place. Earth was small. Its star was unremarkable, its solar system lacking rare minerals or strategic value. Humans, however, were not small. They spread faster than weeds. Within 400 years of discovering faster-than-light travel, they had settled 73 worlds. They built shipyards around dead planets. They turned barren moons into bustling trade hubs. And worst of all, they did not ask permission. The Council's leading species, the Vorth, tall and silvery with long memories, grew worried. Humans broke every unspoken rule. They shared technology freely with younger races, upsetting the careful balance of power. They defended Rylak species, the Vorth term translated to weak ones, against Council-sanctioned exploitation. They even dared to modify their own DNA, creating subspecies adapted to high gravity, low light, and poisonous atmospheres. To the Council, humanity was an infection. The decision to exile Earth came after the so-called incident at Kalon's Belt. A human exploratory fleet had entered restricted space, a region the Council had reserved for future expansion of the Rylak hierarchy. The humans claimed they were responding to a distress signal from a stranded civilian transport. The Rylak claimed it was a provocation. In truth, the distress signal was real, but the Council did not care. They needed a reason. The vote was unanimous. All 12 species agreed. Sol system would be sealed. A permanent energy barrier, powered by 7 linked null fields, would surround the orbit of Jupiter. No ship could enter. No signal could escape. Humans already living on colony worlds would be rounded up and returned to Earth within 1 galactic standard year. After that, any human found outside Sol would be considered rogue and subject to immediate elimination. The Vorth ambassador delivered the verdict to Earth's global assembly. His words were cold and precise. Your species has shown that it cannot coexist within the established order. You are not being punished. You are being contained. Return to your cradle. Forget the stars. They were never yours. The human delegation sat in silence. Then an old woman, the ambassador from the Pacific Alliance, stood up. Her name was Elara Vance, and she had been a child when the first human ship landed on Proxima Centauri. She looked at the Vorth and said nothing for a full minute. Finally, she spoke. You have no idea what you just did. The exile began the next day. Human colonies across the galaxy panicked. Families were torn apart. Some humans accepted their fate and boarded Council transport ships back to Earth. Others went into hiding. A few fought back, small skirmishes that ended quickly against Council military might. Within 6 months, over 90% of off-world humans had been returned to Earth. The remaining 10% disappeared into the dark between stars, becoming legends and ghosts. Earth itself changed. With the barrier in place, humanity could no longer leave. They could not trade. They could not explore. The global economy collapsed, then rebuilt itself around internal needs. Old rivalries resurfaced, wars over remaining resources, famines, plagues. But through it all, something else grew. A quiet, burning anger. And a question: why had the Council truly feared them? That question found its first answer 3 years after the exile. A deep space listening post on Pluto's moon Charon, still operational because the Council had forgotten it existed, picked up a strange signal. It came from beyond the barrier, from a region of space the Council had declared empty. The signal was not a language. It was a pattern, mathematical, precise, and it was counting down. The humans who decoded it realized 2 things. First, the Council had not exiled Earth because humans were dangerous to the Council. They had exiled Earth because humans were the only species capable of sensing the danger that the Council itself had ignored. Second, the countdown had less than 40 years remaining. When it reached 0, something would arrive. Something that the Council's ancient texts whispered about only in forbidden vaults. The humans called it the Silence, an extragalactic force that had already consumed 3 other galaxies before entering the Milky Way. The Council knew. They had always known. And they had chosen to lock away the one species that might have stopped it. Because stopping the Silence would require breaking every rule the Council held sacred. It would require sacrifice, chaos, and the kind of creative destruction that only humans seem to enjoy. Elara Vance, now the unofficial leader of Earth's remnant space program, stood before a holographic map of the galaxy. The barrier glowed like a cage around Sol. Beyond it, the council went about its business, pretending the countdown did not exist. She turned to her engineers, young, hungry, furious, and gave the order that would begin humanity's true response. Build me a ship that can break through that barrier. Not with force, with trickery. The council thinks they've confined us to a cradle. Let's show them we've turned the whole damned galaxy into our cradle. She smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a species that had just realized its exile was not a punishment. It was an invitation. The countdown was still ticking, but now, so was a new clock, humanity's clock. And the council would soon learn that locking away a clever, stubborn, and vengeful species was the worst decision they had ever made. Section 2. The barrier around Sol was a masterpiece of alien engineering. 7 null field generators, each the size of a small moon, created a seamless web of distorted spacetime. Any object moving faster than a certain velocity would be shunted into a pocket dimension and returned to its point of origin. Slower objects, asteroids, comets, old space debris, could pass through, but only because the council considered them harmless. They never considered that humans might use slow things as weapons. Elara Vance's engineers spent 11 years studying the barrier. They sent unmanned probes coated in radar-absorbing material, disguised as random rocks. Most were caught. A few made it through and transmitted precious data back home. The data revealed a weakness. The null field generators required synchronization. Every 4.7 seconds, a microgap opened between two of the fields, a gap smaller than a proton, lasting less than a trillionth of a second. In theory, nothing could exploit it. In practice, humans had been thinking about the word nothing for a very long time. A young physicist named Kale Morozov proposed the solution. He had been 5 years old when the barrier went up. Now he was 16, and he had already mapped the gap's behavior with terrifying precision. We don't send a ship through, he told the Council of Survivors. We send a quantum-entangled message. The gap is small, but information doesn't need space. It needs timing. If we can pulse our message exactly when the gap opens, the barrier will read it as background noise. On the other side, a receiver built from the same entangled particles will reconstruct the message. No ship, no mass, just a whisper. It took another 4 years to build the quantum messenger. The device was the size of a shipping container, powered by a miniature black hole contained in a magnetic bottle. It was dangerous, unstable, and brilliant. On the day of the test, Elara Vance watched from a bunker on Mars's surface. The messenger fired at the precise microsecond. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then a light blinked on the receiver, which sat on a table in the same bunker, having been built simultaneously from identical entangled particles. The message had gone out, passed through the barrier, and returned. It was a single word, hello. The council did not notice. The gap was too small, the signal too faint. Humanity had just drawn the first invisible line across the stars, a line made not of force but of knowledge. They now had a way to communicate with the humans who had escaped the exile, the 10% who had vanished into the dark. Those escaped humans had not been idle. They called themselves the Dispersed. They lived on hidden stations inside asteroid belts, on rogue planets without suns, inside the thick atmospheres of gas giants. They had no central government, only a loose network of captains, engineers, and soldiers who shared one belief. The Council had no right to imprison Earth. Over the years, the Dispersed had built a small but capable fleet. They had also made contact with other species that the Council had oppressed, the timid Null, the mechanical Vex, even a splinter faction of the Rylak who believed their leaders had made a terrible mistake. When the quantum message from Earth reached the Dispersed, their reaction was immediate and emotional. Many had given up hope of ever hearing from home again. Now they learned that the barrier could be bypassed, that Earth was not dead but waiting, that a plan was forming. The message contained a simple instruction: prepare for reunion. We are coming. Not through the barrier, around it. But how do you go around a spherical barrier that surrounds your entire solar system? The answer came from an unexpected source: the silence itself. Over 15 years of monitoring the countdown, Earth's astronomers had noticed something strange. The silence was not just approaching. It was already interacting with the galaxy. Gravity waves, neutrino bursts, and strange radiation leaks were appearing in regions far from the barrier. The Council's military was scrambling to contain these leaks, but they lacked the data to understand them. Humans, by contrast, were experts at pattern recognition. They noticed that the leaks created temporary distortions in space-time, miniature wormholes that linked distant points in the galaxy. One of those points was near Proxima Centauri, humanity's first colony, now abandoned. Another was less than 2 light-years from Earth's barrier. If a ship could reach that second point, a place the Council had never mapped because it was inside a deadly radiation nebula, it might use the distortion to jump directly to the Proxima side of the barrier. From there, the ship could reach Earth with conventional drive. It was insane. It was suicidal. It was exactly the kind of plan that old Elara Vance had built her reputation on. She personally selected the crew for the mission, 37 men and women, all volunteers, all with nothing left to lose. Their ship was the Theseus, an old mining vessel retrofitted with stolen Council engines and a prototype distortion shield. They would fly into the nebula, find the wormhole leak, and ride it to Proxima. If they succeeded, they would be the first humans to reach Earth from outside since the Exile. If they failed, they would be torn apart by radiation or crushed by unstable gravity. The launch was quiet. No fireworks, no speeches. The Theseus slipped out of the Martian shipyard like a ghost and accelerated toward the nebula. Elara Vance watched it go, her face unreadable. She was old now, her hair completely white, her hands trembling from a neurological condition that had no cure. But her eyes were still sharp. She had seen humanity survive 2 world wars, a climate collapse, and the loss of the stars. She would see them break through this cage too. 12 days later, the Theseus entered the nebula. Communications became impossible. For a month, Earth heard nothing. People prayed, cursed, and argued. Some said the mission had been a fantasy from the start. Others said the crew had abandoned their duty. Elara Vance said nothing. She simply stared at the dark sky, waiting. Then, on the 42nd day, a signal came through. It was weak, garbled, and barely recognizable. But the words that emerged were clear enough. We made it. We are on the other side. Sending coordinates. The line has been drawn. Come and find us. The crowd in the control room erupted in cheers. Elara Vance closed her eyes and allowed herself the smallest of smiles. The decision to exile Earth had backfired in a way the Council never imagined. Not because humans were stronger or smarter. Because humans were stubborn. They refused to accept that a line drawn by others could ever truly hold them. And now, with a path open and a growing alliance of the dispersed, they were ready to teach the galaxy what stubborn really meant. Section 3. The Council learned of the Theseus's success 3 months later, and their reaction was panic disguised as outrage. The Vorth ambassador demanded emergency sessions. The Rylak hierarchy called for a military escalation, a sterilization pulse that would destroy every human structure within the barrier, including Earth itself. The motion failed by a single vote. The dissenting species was the Exile, a quiet aquatic race that had long suspected the Council's motives regarding the silence. They did not speak publicly against the pulse. Instead, they secretly transmitted the Council's battle plans to the dispersed. Now the conflict moved from shadow to open space. The dispersed fleet, numbering just over 200 ships, gathered at a neutral point near the abandoned human colony of New Hokkaido. They were joined by the Theseus, which had become a symbol of hope and defiance. Their goal was not to defeat the Council militarily. That was impossible. Their goal was to force the Council to recognize a simple fact. Humanity would not be contained. And if the Council continued trying, humanity would ensure that when the silence arrived, the Council would face it alone. The human strategy relied on a classic tactic, asymmetric warfare. They could not match Council firepower, but they could strike where the Council was blind. The silence leaks, those space-time distortions, were opening and closing at unpredictable intervals. The Council's ships avoided them. The humans flew straight into them, using the distortions to appear behind Council lines, sabotage supply depots, and rescue imprisoned human loyalists. Each raid lasted seconds. Each raid left the Council confused and afraid. The turning point came at the Battle of the Rylak Shipyards. The Rylak were building a new class of warship, the Annihilator, designed to crack planetary shields. If completed, the Annihilator could destroy Earth's remaining defenses with a single shot. The Dispersed learned of the construction through their Exile contacts. They also learned that the shipyards were protected by a static defense grid that no conventional attack could penetrate. But the grid had one weakness. It was calibrated for Council technology, which followed predictable patterns. Human ships, cobbled together from scavenged parts, did not follow any pattern. Commander Soren Akida, a former Council prisoner who had escaped execution by faking his own death, led the assault. His fleet of 42 ships approached the shipyards from an angle the defense grid did not expect, directly through a nearby star's corona. The heat should have melted their hulls. But human engineers had lined their ships with a layer of recycled carbon composite, a material that the Council had dismissed as primitive. It held. The ships emerged from the star's fire like demons from myth, weapons hot, targeting the Annihilator's exposed engine section. The Rylak defenders were skilled but rigid. They followed doctrine. The humans followed instinct. Within 30 minutes, the Annihilator was crippled, its engine core breached. The shipyards themselves sustained heavy damage. The Dispersed lost 12 ships, but they achieved their objective. The Annihilator would never fly. More importantly, they captured a Council data core containing detailed records of the Silence, its origin, its feeding patterns, and the Council's secret plan to survive it. That plan was horrific. The Council did not intend to fight the Silence. They intended to hide. The data core revealed a network of deep space bunkers, each capable of sustaining a small population for 10,000 years. The bunkers were reserved exclusively for the ruling species, Vorth, Rylak, and 3 others. The remaining Council species, along with every disruptive race like humanity, would be left to die. The Silence would consume the galaxy's energy, then move on. The Council would emerge from hiding and rebuild under strict authoritarian control. When the Dispersed broadcast this discovery across all comm channels, the Council fractured. The Null and Vex, who had been promised protection, turned against their masters. Protests erupted on Council homeworlds. A Vorth general named Thrax, disgusted by the betrayal, defected with an entire fleet and offered his services to humanity. He transmitted a personal message to Elara Vance. You were right to be angry. The exile was not justice. It was cowardice. Help me stop the Silence, and I will help you tear down every cage the Council has built. Elara Vance, now too frail to leave Earth's surface, responded through Kale Morozov's quantum messenger. She accepted the general's offer, but set one condition. Humanity would not simply replace the Council. They would create something new, a galaxy where no species could exile another, where every voice had a place at the table, where the line that mattered was not a border but a promise. General Thrax agreed. He had seen the human spirit up close, in the faces of the Dispersed soldiers who had fought with reckless courage. He knew that the old order was dead. The only question was what would rise in its place. Humanity now had an ally with inside knowledge of Council tactics, a growing fleet of defectors, and the moral high ground. But they also had a deadline. The countdown had 23 years left. The Silence was already altering the orbits of outer planets, draining energy from stars, sending ripples of death across the galaxy. The Council's plan to hide would fail. The data core itself admitted that the bunkers had only a 30% chance of survival. The only real hope was to fight, and fighting required something the Council had never possessed, a weapon that could destroy a non-physical, extragalactic entity. Humans had been thinking about that weapon since the day the countdown was discovered. It would not be a bomb or a beam. The Silence fed on organized energy, stars, reactors, even the electrical impulses of living brains. You could not shoot it. You could only confuse it, overwhelm it with chaos, force it to starve in a galaxy turned unpredictable. And chaos, as the Council had learned painfully, was humanity's greatest gift. The plan was simple in concept, impossible in execution. Humans would use the Silence's own wormhole leaks against it. They would seed the galaxy with thousands of noise generators, devices that emitted random, untraceable energy bursts. The Silence would chase these false signals, wasting its strength, while a final device at the galaxy's core would emit a pulse of pure entropy, unraveling the Silence's cohesion. The pulse would also destroy every artificial structure within 100 light years. It would be a sacrifice, but humans had never been afraid of sacrifice. Elara Vance approved the plan 3 days before she died. Her last words, spoken to a room full of young engineers and old soldiers, were simple: draw the line. Not around Earth, across the stars. Let them know where we stand. She closed her eyes, and humanity lost its oldest, wisest voice. But they did not lose her fire. That fire had already spread to 1,000,000 hearts, and it would burn until the silence was broken or the galaxy was dust. Section 420 years passed. The silence grew closer, its presence now visible as a dark smear across the night sky, a patch where stars winked out one by one. Council resistance collapsed entirely after the Vorth homeworld was evacuated. The Vorth themselves retreated to their bunkers, sealing the doors behind them. The Rylak tried to negotiate with the silence, sending diplomats into the void. They never returned. The surviving Council species either joined humanity's alliance or fled to the Galactic Rim, hoping to outrun the inevitable. Humanity, now numbering over 3 billion across Earth, the dispersed colonies, and allied worlds, worked with desperate efficiency. They built the noise generators in hidden factories, on asteroids, inside nebulas, even on the surface of dead planets. Each generator was small, no larger than a human fist, powered by a radioactive core that would last a century. They launched them by the millions, using automated drones that traveled through the wormhole leaks. Within 15 years, the galaxy shimmered with false signals. The silence slowed. It hesitated. For the first time in its ancient existence, it encountered prey that fought back with confusion instead of armies. The final device, the Entropy Pulse, was built at the galactic core, inside the accretion disk of the supermassive black hole known as Sagittarius A star. The location was chosen because the black hole's gravity would amplify the Entropy Pulse 1,000-fold, spreading it across the entire galaxy. The cost was that no ship could survive the journey to the core. The pulse had to be delivered by a single pilot, flying a heavily shielded vessel, knowing they would never return. The Alliance asked for volunteers. They received 10,000 applications within a week. The chosen pilot was Commander Soren Akida, the same man who had led the raid on the Rylak shipyards. He was older now, scarred, but his eyes still burned with the same fire. He accepted the mission without hesitation. "I've been dead since the Council tried to execute me," he said. "Every day since has been borrowed time. Let me pay it back." The launch of the Entropy vessel, named Elara's Final Line, was the largest gathering of allied ships in galactic history. Thousands of vessels, human, Exile, Null, Vex, and defector Rylak, formed an honor guard as the small, dark ship accelerated toward the core. There were no speeches, no ceremonies. The gravity of the moment silenced everyone. Soren Akida transmitted one last message, addressed to every human who had ever dreamed of the stars. We were exiled. We were called dangerous. We were told to forget the stars. But we never forgot. And now, we don't ask permission. We draw our own lines. This is mine. Watch. The Elara's Final Line dove into the accretion disk. For a terrible minute, nothing happened. Then a flash of white light erupted from the core, not an explosion, but a wave, a ripple in the fabric of reality itself. The Entropy Pulse expanded outward at the speed of light, washing over planets, stars, and the dark smear of the silence. Where the pulse passed, the silence did not scream. It simply stopped. Its cohesion unraveled like a thread pulled from a tapestry. The dark smear broke into fragments, then into dust, then into nothing. The silence was gone, not defeated by force, but by confusion, by chaos, by a species that had refused to play by the rules. The cost was terrible. The Entropy Pulse destroyed every artificial structure within 100 light years of the core, including the Council's deep space bunkers. The Vorth and Rylak leaders who had hidden there perished instantly. Many allied ships in the honor guard were also lost, caught by the edge of the pulse. But the galaxy was saved. The stars that had winked out began to flicker back, their energy restored now that the silence no longer fed on them. In the aftermath, humanity did not seek revenge. They did not hunt down the remaining Council loyalists or demand tribute. Instead, they did something that shocked every surviving species. They offered help. Engineers from Earth traveled to the damaged worlds of former enemies, rebuilding what the chaos had broken. Doctors shared medical knowledge. Teachers set up schools on planets that had never seen a book. The line that Elara Vance had spoken of was not a wall or a weapon. It was a simple promise, broadcast on every frequency. No one will be exiled again. No one will be left to face the dark alone. These are the lines we draw, not to keep others out, but to keep everyone in. The new galactic order was messy, chaotic, and loud, exactly like humanity itself. The council was dissolved. In its place came the Concord of Voices, where every species, no matter how small or weak, had a vote. Humans did not dominate the Concord. They did not even try. They had learned that true strength came from lifting others, not from standing on their shoulders. The Dispersed returned to Earth, not as conquerors, but as family. The Theseus, the first ship to break the barrier, was placed in a museum on Mars, a monument to stubborn hope. And the barrier around Sol? It was dismantled piece by piece. The null field generators were repurposed as power stations for distant colonies. The Vorth who had built them, now humbled and grateful, helped with the deconstruction as a gesture of apology. On the day the last generator fell, a human child, born after the silence, who had never known a cage, looked up at the open sky and asked her mother, "What's out there?" Her mother smiled. "Everything. And it's all waiting for us." The decision to exile Earth had backfired spectacularly. Instead of containing humanity, it had unleashed them. Instead of preserving order, it had created something better, a galaxy where lines were drawn not by the powerful, but by the brave. The stars belonged to no one, but they welcomed everyone. And at the center of that welcome, forever and always, was a stubborn, brilliant, impossible species that had refused to stay in its cradle. They had drawn their line, and across the stars, it still glowed.